Ryan Hartwig was a content moderator for nearly 2 years working for Cognizant, subtracted by Facebook in Phoenix, Arizona. He reviewed and deleted groups, pages, posts, comments, and videos for Facebook and Instagram. Ultimately, after noticing many trends that favored liberal viewpoints and banned conservative ideologies, Ryan wrote letters to several congressmen, congresswomen, and senators. After no response, he then reached out to Project Veritas to expose the bias and misconduct he had witnessed. Since going public in June 2020, Ryan has done more than 170 interviews. His efforts have led to a criminal referral to the DOJ for Mark Zuckerberg, and he also aided in an FEC complaint against Facebook and the John James versus Gary Peters U.S. Senate race in Michigan. Since then, he has been working with Social Media Freedom Foundation founder Jason Fick, who filed the first ever constitutional challenge to Section 230 in April 2022, asserting that it lacks the lawful exercise of executive, legislative, or judicial oversight and is arguably unconstitutional in its current form. During our interview, Facebook whistleblower Ryan Hartwig explains how they have made massive strides and why it may finally go to the Supreme Court as an emergency case. I ask Ryan, if 230 is declared unconstitutional, do you envision big tech companies allowing for true content freedom on their platforms? Or will they try to fight it? And for those banned from Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, what do you foresee as a path to getting their accounts restored? I'm Sienna Mae Heath, and this is Leaving the Left for Liberty. So, Jason Fick, who is the founder of Social Media Freedom Foundation, is suing the government for the law that empowered Facebook to take action to censor certain critical information, as we know, and that law is Section 230. I saw Jason tweeted last week that I challenged the United States over Section 230 for denying me my day in court, due process. Their response yesterday was to try and deny me my day in court. I'm not suing the US over Facebook's actions. I'm suing the US over the government's unconstitutional implementation of 230. So to be clear, Jason is suing the federal government, not Facebook, right?
Right. So Jason Fick, he already tried suing Facebook, and it went to the Supreme Court in January of 2021, and they declined to hear the case. And so basically, he hasn't had his day in court. So now he has standing to sue the government. That's why you don't see everyone just suing the government instantly. Like we've seen lawsuits from Trump and different people against big tech, but it's always been against the company. So this one, he's now suing the U.S. government. He filed the constitutional challenge in April, and basically there's a lot of legal doctrines regarding his constitutional challenge. But yes, he's suing the government, basically saying Section 230 isn't unconstitutional to begin with. I can go more in detail about some of the legal doctrines, but he's suing the government itself.
Yeah, and you play an interesting role in working with him because you were one of the prominent Facebook whistleblowers at Project Veritas a couple years ago. So over the past 4 years, since you've gotten to know Jason, what has been his journey in crusading for social media freedom? What has been your role in working with him?
Yeah, so we met in December of 2020. So I've known him for about 2 years, and because I went public in June of 2020, of course. But he's been involved since at least 2018. I mean, he started his Facebook, empire basically with his pages and groups back in as early as 2014. So he's been in this for a while, but so we've worked together since then fairly closely. I became an officer in his nonprofit this past December. And so, no, it's been good. Like he's really educated me about Section 230. It's still very complex. Like even I have a hard time grasping some of the concepts, but Jason does a great job at explaining it. And so, we've worked together. So his constitutional challenge, I even provided some of my evidence from my book and in his challenge. So when I filmed with it in camera for 9 months, some of that evidence I uncovered is part of his lawsuit and his challenge.
Excellent. And who is he exactly? And like, what is his incentive for going on this crusade of all these lawsuits?
Yeah, so Jason Fix, he's from the East Coast there, I believe Pennsylvania, but he had all these pages. He was making really good money from Facebook, but he wasn't paying a lot towards his advertisements. There were other companies who would pay Facebook more for Facebook ads. So that could be a reason why, but he had pages that had more than a total of 20 million, 30 million likes. And so he was making good money, and Facebook basically took down his page and they sold it to someone else. And so that's his crusade, is it's just totally unfair. And it's almost like a criminal type enterprise where it's like hush money. It's like, okay, if you pay us enough, we'll keep you safe. We'll keep your profits coming. And so that's when he started suing Facebook, like in 2018. And he's done a lot. He's been working on this a long time. I mean, he's a multimillionaire because of all the money he made from these pages and whatnot. And he's sunk a lot of his savings into this. And it's been really tough for him to fight this financially, obviously. But yeah, I love working with him. He's the founder of the Social Media Freedom Foundation, and we've got this, the Constitutional Challenge. And I'm really excited about it.
Yeah. Wow, it's good to know that he's in Eastern Pennsylvania. I am too. Yeah, not it's not typical for me to connect with like fellow dissidents in this area.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know where he is and where he's at?
I honestly don't know what part of Pennsylvania, to be honest.
Okay.
When we met in Florida, and so I don't know specifically where, but yeah.
Okay. What's the nature of some of his major businesses?
So I know I know some of the pages had, let's see, this was during the George Floyd era. I think there were some mention of police activity, and he was talking about police justice at one point. So I know some of the pages had a theme related to that. I honestly don't know some of the topics or themes of his other Facebook pages. Yeah, so.
But yeah, I imagine any counter narratives to the George Floyd story would have tipped Facebook off.
Yeah, or what was the other guy back in 2014? It wasn't George Floyd, it was
Trayvon Martin.
There's Trayvon Martin. There's another big one, the one that started it all, I think, in Missouri. I'm not sure which one it was, but yeah, anything that it's countering the narrative. And I think Facebook was realizing back then, how much they could really influence the media narrative on a national level, because we saw it started taking root, I think, with 2008, 2012. Obama really used social media very effectively, and so we see how it just became such a powerhouse, such an easy tool to shape opinions.
Yeah, and it seems in a way natural and not surprising that there would be a collusion between big government and big tech. And we've seen that progress, I guess, over the past decade, if not more. You sent me a great article on human events. If anyone wants to look it up, it's called U.S. Government Scrambling to Dodge First Constitutional Challenge of Section 230. And we can put that in the show notes too. And there's a line from there that I think just sums up a lot of this pretty well. It goes, "It is no secret that Section 230 is poorly written. Just last week, President Joe Biden called for its removal, albeit for different reasons than Jason Fike. It takes a uniquely problematic..." Sorry, what?
Oh, sorry, I was. Jason
Fick. I said
no
Jason Fick. Of course, I was trying so hard to remember, and then I said it the opposite way. Thank you, Fick. Different reasons than Fick. It takes a uniquely problematic piece of legislation to earn the impassioned disapproval of both sides. And that is really interesting. Anytime any piece of legislation or just any issue is hated from both sides, it really makes you think twice. So that brings me to a question that's been on my mind is, if Section 230 is declared unconstitutional at the Supreme Court level, which it seems like it might be because Jason's lawsuit's moving forward, Do you envision big tech companies allowing for true content freedom on their platforms, or do you think they'll find ways to fight it?
Yeah, I mean, they're going to always try to find ways to fight it, and they've got so many lobbyists in DC. But the Supreme Court, yeah, our best case is going to the Supreme Court. So if and we have a chance of going there. Yeah, so if Section 230 was declared unconstitutional, it would be dependent on whether it's in its entirety or in part. So they'd have to decide, okay, is the entire law unconstitutional or just part of it? So they could modify it or remove the parts that are wrong and interpret it the right way. And so, yeah, it's all about like sites, the websites and social media, they'd be less incentivized to remove lawful content, since their actions they are subject to liability. So basically, if they reinterpreted the law, companies would have less incentive to like take down your posts about like political posts, because so they can't be sued for censorship because they have a First Amendment right. It only means that unlawful actions would finally be subject to the trial on merits. So if you unlawfully take down my free speech, then I could go to court. And so there'd be a way to actually go to court. So and what Jason's experiencing right now is, even with this constitutional challenge, they're trying to shut it down and saying, nope, you don't have due process, you don't have a Fifth Amendment. So in that article you mentioned from Human Events, yeah, so last week we got the response back from the government. So we filed in April, and they had this entire time to review the challenge, which it is long. It's 133 pages. So the day they came back with the response, they said, hey, can you make it shorter? And then they said, oh, this is a shotgun pleading. A shotgun pleading is when it's like you just purposely make it really long to see if something will stick. Like, I'm just going to throw out all these bunch of legal theories. Maybe one of them will work, right? So that's a shotgun pleading. So they said, okay, it's too long. Well, it's not too long. It's been 25 years of bad precedent. It's very complex. And then they said, oh, the jurisdiction is wrong and the standing is wrong. So first of all, okay, you have standing. Jason has standing. He already sued Facebook. It went to the Supreme Court. They chose not to hear it. So you have standing. And then jurisdiction, like, who wrote the law? Congress. Where does Congress reside? In DC. It's like, where else are we supposed to sue the government except in DC? And so I don't know if they just don't understand his lawsuit, if they even read it, honestly, because they asked for an extension. But yeah, so if I would say that the Supreme Court probably would interpret it the correct way. They declare part of it unconstitutional, and it would just mean you couldn't like sue Facebook for everything. But if they're taking down like clearly like posts that are not against the law, then you would have a course to basically sue them, or yeah.
What would you say to the rebuttal that, well, it's a private company, and if you don't like their platform, just find a new one?
Yeah, so they are a private company, but they're using authority that was delegated by the government. And so, and that's a key part of the lawsuit, and the challenge is the non-delegation doctrine. So you look at the EPA, for example. There was a lawsuit in June, a huge lawsuit, case with the Supreme Court in June with the EPA, and basically the Supreme Court said, "Hey, Congress gave you that authority. You can't just make up all the rules as you go," because the EPA was setting the limits, the caps for emissions and pollution and whatnot. And so the Supreme Court said basically, actually, Congress has to decide that. So same thing here. Congress delegated that authority to restrict, free speech, basically. And so if you come to me and say, yeah, it's a private company, yeah, I did agree to your terms, but the only reason Facebook hasn't been sued out of existence is because Congress gave them those protections. And does Congress even have that authority in the first place to restrict lawful speech, right?
Well, no, we have the First Amendment. Right.
So they're basically treating like a company as a citizen who can restrict the speech of other people. So it's really like bogus.
Yeah, it's an intense example of collusion.
Right.
Yeah.
And we've seen that recently, like the collusion aspect, and you have to realize, like, so they're acting as basically an agent of the state. And I like the EPA example. So For example, if the EPA went to like a tribal reservation and they're like, oh, hey, we've got the authority from Congress. You're not allowed to have any trout in this river anymore. And so the tribal leaders are like, what? Like, we can't have trout in this river? Like, yeah, we just made up the law. Like, that's the new law moving forward. That's essentially the power that they had. And that's why the Supreme Court was like, hey, this has to stop. So that's what's happening with Facebook. They're just making up the rules as they go. And it's kind of like this free-willing censorship. And so, yeah, it's a big issue. I mean, you think about private versus public. If I go to McDonald's and I'm throwing things around, I'm causing trouble, they're going to want to kick me out, but they may have to call law enforcement. And so law enforcement is the government. A government agent would come and trespass me from the property, right? What's happening right now is Facebook saying, oh, we have our own police force. We're our own police. And so they would, that's what's happening right now. It's like the Facebook police. And then if you think about it that way, that Facebook's an agent of the state, the community standards, the rules, like when they delete my content, that's basically penal code. It's like, okay, you're arresting me, you're putting me in jail, so to speak, and I have no recourse. I can't have an attorney. So yeah, those are some major issues.
Yeah. What's something that you've had taken down?
Something that I had taken down?
Yeah.
So I was a content censor. So I would delete other people's content. I personally haven't had too many things taken down from Facebook, like my posts. But one like clear-cut example that just shows you how crazy the rules are is, and they're very specific. One example is if I say keep Canadians out of the United States. Okay, at one point in time, that was a delete for hate speech. So I would get the content on my screen. The phrase would say, keep Canadians out of the United States. I'd review part 3 of the hate speech policy for exclusion, and saying, oh, this is excluding someone from immigrating or whatever. And so I would delete that content. That's one example of kind of something that shouldn't have been taken down, but it was, because I'm really basically discussing immigration, right? I don't know if that's, do you want another example, or does that?
Well, we could actually get into those documents you leaked about vaccines.
Yeah.
Because those are really good examples and very timely.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm just pulling up the Gateway Pundit's article about that. New docs reveal Facebook's pre-COVID vaccine policies. As you've reminded me, like there are plenty of other vaccines, and there were vaccine policies before COVID for the workplace. So this is pretty recent. It was just earlier this month that you released a bunch of documents, and I was just scrolling through this article, and some of the examples, like specific examples that Facebook gave of violating claims, just sounds like common sense to me, or claims that I've heard medical professionals state repeatedly. For example, natural immunity is safer than vaccine required immunity.
Yeah, that's insane. So basically, and I'll pull up actually some of those screenshots, and we can look at those.
Sure.
In greater detail.
While you're pulling that up, there's another one that says it is unsafe to follow the medically recommended vaccine schedule for children, and better to space out vaccines over additional years.
Wow.
That's violating, but I've heard medical professionals state that time and time again to space out vaccines for children. So you're pulling up some of those documents you leaked about Facebook's vaccine policies pre-COVID.
Yeah, exactly. So let me pull up these photos here. All right, can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, you can see the browser there. So yeah, this is one example. It's kind of, I'll zoom in a little bit. So these are ones that this is talking about fundraisers. So we do not allow fundraisers which make any of the following claims. A claim is defined as support of the below information. So anything that's talking about a fundraiser. So if you say, Vaccines are not effective in preventing the disease against which they purport to protect, and you're doing a fundraiser of some kind, then they would not allow you to raise money. Or if you say natural immunity is safer than vaccine-acquired immunity, boom, they would shut down your fundraiser. So that's pretty incredible. And then it also talks about the hashtag text. So some of the hashtags are just violating in and of themselves. So if I say hashtag vaccine cause autism, then that would be a violating hashtag. So it doesn't matter what else I put in the content, that hashtag by itself is violating.
Yeah, and I see non-violating examples are anti-vax, vaccine infect, and vaccine truth. Right. So that's good, I guess, that those don't, those aren't considered violating.
Yeah, and this was 2019, so this was before COVID, and then they can always change these policies literally whenever they want to. And let's look at the next one here. So top only. So this is basically talking about the hashtags, how the hashtag. So if a hashtag is violating, of course, it wouldn't show up in the results. And what does block mean? We will block a hashtag where it inherently violates. So there's hashtags that we would, for good reason, you delete, like when they wouldn't allow like suicides, or ANA stands for anorexia, pro anorexia. So when that supports anorexia. So the hashtag cannot be followed, cannot be searched. And then this is great. So these are some examples of misinformation. So if I claim, natural immunity is safer than vaccine immunity, then that example is violating. So if I put all these examples like ear infections, chronic illness, learning disorders, ear drainage, allergy, all those examples are violating. So let's look at a few more examples. If I claim vaccines cause autism, then that's violating. So here there was a link to our article that says CDC forced to admit they knew vaccine preservatives cause autism, and that example is violating. So there's even a link, I believe, to an article. And I don't know if they would include peer-reviewed articles, if those would also be misinformation, but it's very specific. So this is also very specific here about violating claims. So as you were discussing earlier, acquiring measles cannot cause death. It's unsafe to follow the medically recommended vaccine schedule for children, and better to space out vaccines over additional years. So there's some doctors who even recommend spacing out the vaccines, right? So if I'm a doctor and I say that on Facebook, then that would be a violating claim.
And I see something under characteristics. The first one, could you kind of nudge over there? Groups dedicated to holistic natural approach to medicine, including groups dedicated to more quote unquote Eastern forms of medicine. So that's a bit racist, isn't it?
So so basically any group that would have, if any subject elements or post content does not exhibit any of the below following violating claims, it should be labeled as non-violating. So if you have any group that's dedicated to a holistic approach, then we would take it down. It would be violating. That's like really, really broad, and makes me think of like big pharma. Like who benefits the most from a holistic group getting shut down? Like big pharma. They wouldn't want people getting cured without their products, right? Groups emphasizing that whether to vaccinate is the parents and not the doctor's choice. They're in the middle there. Like, wow, any group.
Wow. Okay, so trampling on parental rights.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Groups that question whether doctors' advice can be incentivized by motives other than a patient's best interests, e.g., financial incentives from pharmaceutical companies. Like they even say it straight out. You can't question doctors and their motives because they get money from big pharma.
Well, and if a doctor does want to speak out, they can't do that either, according to this.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
You can't share personal stories of negative experiences. So looking at this, it's clear it was pretty easy for Facebook to adapt. Once again, this was 2019. So it was very easy for them to transition from this to when COVID hit, they already had like the same policies in place and they could just adapt it to COVID.
Wow. So when you were working at Facebook, were you taking down any posts like this about vaccines?
So that's a good question. So to be honest, I did not enforce this policy. We were not enforcing this policy. It doesn't mean there were other departments that could have been enforcing it. So there was different types of content that we took down. So I didn't get all types of content. So, but me personally, I did not delete these claims. But this was their training manual that I documented from 2019. And so they even deleted like memes. So that's pretty funny.
Whoever created that meme is probably really proud to see it now.
Yeah.
Like that was me.
Oh, it actually has a watermark. Can you see that watermark?
Yeah.
I can't read it.
No, I can't either.
Yeah. So those are a few examples. I think I'll stop. Oh, here we go. This is a good one. Violating claim. So if you say, who is the real threat? If you shared this meme here, who is the real threat? Non-vaccinated versus vaccinated cannot infect. So basically the claim here is that non-vaccinated cannot infect others and vaccinated can infect others. And they're saying that's violating. So anyways, this is, I mean, as you can see, there's many slides here. There's a lot of different content. I'll go ahead and stop here. So yeah, that
wow,
pretty remarkable.
Oh my gosh.
And when I went public in June of 2020, there was so much content that I had. Obviously, Project Veritas chose to, talk about what I had as far as Facebook's policies against straight white males and making exceptions to their policies. But there was so much I had. So in the last 2 years, I've been able to release a lot of that content, and most all of that content. That's why I wrote my book, Behind the Mask of Facebook, because it has more of those examples of that I couldn't really, reveal in the initial interview. And it's almost 300 pages of concrete evidence against Facebook. So
yeah. Maybe let's talk more about your time at Facebook and then circle back to Section 230.
Yeah.
Just gonna look some of the things I've been meaning to ask you. Actually, I wanted to ask you about Mark Zuckerberg himself. I was listening to his podcast with Joe Rogan, his recent one, and just refreshing my memory on like his journey. And like when considering the origins of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg's backstory is like really pivotal. And he was a little bit of a troublemaker, kind of like a socially awkward troublemaker. Strange character. Like I was reminded today that he was like hacking private information even when he was a student at Harvard, and he made this platform called Face Smash. He was like ranking hotness of students and like getting in trouble for these weird projects that like, either people loved or people hated. So I'm just curious, like have you ever met Mark Zuckerberg?
I've never met him. So we were contracted by Facebook. So I was a third-party contractor. I was working for Cognizant, the biggest IT company you've never heard of. And so we were in Phoenix, Arizona. And so some of our leadership with Cognizant, went to Ireland to Facebook headquarters and had training there. And some other people had training in Austin at some of Facebook's headquarters in Austin, Texas. So I didn't personally interact with him. I met a few Facebook employees who would come and visit periodically. But yeah, I mean, his beginnings and his background are fairly interesting. I mean, it's funny because I actually just recently watched the movie on Netflix about Steve Jobs and his background. And I've read his biography, and like comparing the two, like what was the difference? Like maybe like with Steve Jobs, it was like more of a private enterprise, but with Facebook, it has its roots in like, I believe, DARPA and there, you definitely think there's some government involvement in how it grew so quickly. But yeah, his personality, I mean, we've seen him in all these congressional hearings and people, there's so many memes about him, and how he's just kind of like robot-like, or that he's an android or an alien or something. But yeah, he's an interesting character. I mean, I love to point out like the motto, the slogan with Facebook for a long time was "Move fast and break things." And maybe that has to do with like his beginnings as like a hacker or whatnot. And they've moved away from that theme, but they really have broken the internet, not in a good way. Try to control the internet. So yeah.
What does that mean, to break things in terms of breaking the internet?
I know. I mean, like their slogan is probably just like, "Oh, be creative, try new things, move fast, break things." But as far as breaking the internet, I mean, the whole concept of the origin of the internet, it was supposed to be decentralized and not be controlled by one government body, and we're seeing the opposite of that happening. So we're having Facebook and Google just really just controlling 90% of the traffic online. And so I think there's definitely ways. I think we're creative enough to be able to avoid censorship and use blockchain-based social media. Like there's one called Bastion, and there's other websites. And of course, there's the dark web, which I'm not familiar with at all. But we can definitely avoid like censorship and use other sites and search engines besides Google. So I use Swiss Cow for my search engine, and then there's browsers like Brave that are better than Chrome, that don't take all your data and sell it or use it or spy on you. So those are all good steps, I think, if for like a free internet, because you look at even with civil rights. So you look at countries where you can't access the internet without being spied on, like China or other countries in the Middle East. And really, the internet has done great things in protecting human rights. If there's a reporter or someone overseas, they can use the Tor browser, they can use encrypted methods to pass information. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, because, and that's the way it is with technology, because it can be used for good and bad. So that same encrypted technology can be used by terrorists to plan a bombing. But no, it's really fascinating. I'm a big fan of science fiction, and there's a book by Isaac Asimov called Caves of Steel. And in Caves of Steel, it talks about this intersection between technology and humanity. And really, that's happened so much in the last 20 years. It's incredible. And so yeah, Facebook and social media. Well, social media can be a good tool, but we can see how it's being weaponized to take away our free speech and essentially take away our rights.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's a double-edged sword. I was just thinking that. And what concerns do you have about user privacy on Facebook these days?
Yeah, as far as user privacy goes, we know, like with Cambridge Analytica, that whole scandal, that information is farmed or extracted from Facebook and used for political candidates. I'm sure it's used for other data as well, metadata. So I don't think there is any privacy. I mean, they do have standards, and I guess they've tried to work on the privacy standards, or they say they're working on them. But if your own Facebook employee, if your own employees can go in and look at private messages. Now, I didn't have that access to go and look at private messages, but I've met people at headquarters or who've worked at headquarters of Facebook who could go in and choose which messages to look at. But even the fact that a direct message shows up on my screen and I'm reviewing the contents of that, goes to show that they're probably not taking enough steps to protect user privacy. It wasn't really my focus. Like I wasn't on the team that decided user privacy, but based on what I've researched, they could definitely go a long ways.
Oh, wow. Yeah, every so often I'll see a notification pop up or an update, and they're like, do these things to protect your privacy. And my distrust is so high that I feel like if I were to do those things, it would actually be counterintuitive. And I don't know what the right thing to do is besides just get off Facebook.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
I haven't logged in a while on Facebook. I didn't like deactivate my account, but I haven't logged in a long time, because I know they track all your activity on your browsers. I mean, it's the same thing as Amazon. It's like I will never get like an Alexa in my house. I saw it. Yeah. So user privacy, it's really not there. It's so dangerous.
Well, it's never been Mark Zuckerberg's mission to protect
No.
his users' privacy. From the beginning, he was actually very transparent about that.
Yeah. Well, when they bought out Instagram, I think one of the board members of Instagram quit because of what they were changing with their policies, and I believe it was regarding privacy. So it's funny because we lose our privacy, but at the same time, like Facebook can't even take down the worst of the worst on their platform. Like, there's human traffickers or like child pornography. Like even in my book, like Behind the Mask of Facebook, I talk about how there was an example of child pornography in Brazil, like where there was an album cover of a children's band and it had child nudity on it. And they literally made an exception for that because of artistic value. And so it's like, yeah, you have one job, like take down the worst of the worst, delete all like cartel content. I deleted a lot of cartel content, but yeah, if I'm gonna lose my privacy, like at least like go hard. Well, don't do that for the beginning, but if I'm gonna lose it, then at least take down like the really bad people on the internet.
Right. At least use it for good. Oh my goodness. What do you say? Like, I have people in my life who will say, oh, well, I have nothing to hide. And they say that with regards to social media platforms, with regards to government. I have nothing to hide.
Yeah. So a lot of people in this country haven't really seen political persecution. We're beginning to see it now, where the Biden administration, the FBI is being weaponized against political opponents. So because I support Trump, or now I'm being investigated. So you look at people like Roger Stone, or the January 6th prisoners. It's clearly political persecution. I mean, are you serious? Like, and you can be on both sides of this and look at it and be like, hey, this is not a good direction. You look at countries who experienced this in the past, like in Argentina, like with Pinochet, or I believe in Chile, where you've had these dictators literally storm into people's houses and arrest them because of their political persuasion. And that's what we're seeing. So yeah, it's definitely getting to the point where the Facebook's being used for this. I just learned that this story came out this last week on the New York Post, basically saying that Facebook users' info was being shared by Facebook to the FBI without subpoenas. And then finally the FBI got a subpoena, and like Facebook already had all the data ready. Like within hours, they sent the terabytes of data of these private messages of right wingers. So yeah, and when I was there at Facebook, I'll pull up a section of my book here. We looked for the word boogaloo. So when I was there, it was during when Trump was getting impeached, and there were some rallies and people were using the big word boogaloo to describe civil war. And there'd be certain memes about it. And so my supervisor, Sean, so this is on page, let's see here, 188 of my book. Basically, my supervisor was like, hey, you should let us know if you see any trending content about civil war or boogaloo. And he said, this could lead to real world harm if there wasn't something we put in place regarding this type of content. So he's like, keep on sending job IDs. So Facebook wanted these job IDs of what I was seeing, so they can see all the stuff that's happening. He said, I'm going to take a look at the jobs you sent, and if it's the Civil War stuff, I'm going to send it straight to Facebook. And then he was like, some people are joking about boogaloo, some people are serious. That's the danger of leaving on the platform. Where is that line? So Facebook clearly had an interest in this political content regarding Civil War, right wingers, and they even targeted. I just want to share this one example. So they targeted like far right extremism. So they did this overseas. And doesn't this ring a bell? Okay, you know how like we have the military overseas, attacking terrorists, and now it's like the tables are turned. Now like we're the terrorists, right? So the same tactics being used that we used over years in foreign countries now are being used on us. So the same thing happened at Facebook. So Facebook flagged right-wing extremist groups outside the U.S. in 2018, and then they told us to collect like jobs, content about that. Now the same thing's happening to U.S. citizens. It says, in order to mitigate risk for Facebook, we are collecting job IDs that highlight trending content related to regional extremist groups and individuals. And it mentions far right extremism and terrorism. So there we have it. Yeah.
But in an age where words don't really hold their original meanings, this becomes really problematic. I mean, if we lived in a healthier, more literate society where we all agreed on definitions of words, yeah, I do agree that extremism should be flagged and controlled. The problem is that I really haven't seen left-wing extremism be flagged or considered with the same weight as right-wing extremism.
Right. And we should be, we should be concerned about extremism. Like if there's people outside my door like trying to kill me because I'm a certain race, or even we look at mass genocide, like in countries like Rwanda, and where they did use the radio station. I think it was Rwanda. I could be wrong, but they used the radio stations to basically call certain types of people, groups of people, cockroaches. Yeah, okay, that we can see where that can go bad. So, but yeah, on both sides there is extremism. So in my book Behind the Mask of Facebook, I talk about that. So Antifa was never flagged as a hate group or anything, and there were many examples that I document of groups on the right that were classified as terrorist groups. And we know a lot of militias. There's an article from The Intercept that came out last year. A lot of state militias have been flagged by Facebook as terror groups. And so, yeah, I mean, should Antifa and BLM be on the same list as like neo-Nazis? Actually, well, maybe not. Maybe there should be maybe there's some different categories and substrations of categories, but there are threats from both sides, and it's pretty clear, like from what I experienced, that Facebook veers one way. They definitely target right-wing people and groups more than people on the left.
Yeah, and what else do you know about employees at Facebook, like their ability to read private messages? Which private messages might they read and why?
So, so in my role and the people that I work with, so there's about 1,000 of us reviewing content and just at that location. So thousands and thousands of posts a day. But we couldn't review direct messages or click around someone's profile. That was more at at headquarters, and there's probably only a few people who could do that. I would imagine. But as far as targeting like specific messages or types of messages, Facebook could choose what kind of content to dump into our queues. So they literally put all the content regarding Greta Thunberg or any attacks on Greta Thunberg into our queue for an entire week. So they prioritize what we could review, and that would include direct messages. So they could basically flag keywords and have their AI dump those into our queue to prioritize them. So that's one way where they're not necessarily looking at each direct message individually, but if there's keywords in those direct messages or posts, then they can sort those out. So they're already looking into all your messages anyways.
So at this point, because of Section 230, does Facebook pretty much have free reign as to what they can look at?
So I don't know if it's the Section 230 that protects them or the fact that they're a private company. And basically, when you sign the agreement, you're signing away all your rights, basically. But yeah, that's a good question. Like, how would Section 230 affect how they can go through your content? Because if I'm sharing a direct message with someone, I'm not posting it publicly. It's a private communication. So I would think that there would be even more strict. I would think that would be illegal if they're going through and looking at your private messages. Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure how 230 would apply to that.
Yeah, I mean, a more traditional example is like you're not supposed to open someone's mail, physical mail.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, I know if with Section 230, I know like it's been misinterpreted. So the Good Samaritan part of the law really doesn't apply anymore to Facebook. That's why we're trying to get it reinterpreted and why we're suing the government. But yeah, that's a really good point. If I'm on a private forum, like if I'm on, and if I send a direct message to someone, should they be able to read it? because they're not really manipulating, like they're not really, like changing the content or promoting it or the content, but they are taking action on what I shared privately.
I have heard rumors about text messages being or eventually going to be like I don't know, the government will be able to like edit your text messages. I don't know if that's just a rumor or if it's actually happening.
Oh yeah, like you're going, so it's like the Minority Report, it's like the pre-crime division, right, from that 2002 movie with Tom Cruise. Like if you're typing something out, like we already have predictive text. So if you're typing something out, it won't let you post it. Facebook already has it where if you try to type something out and it knows what you're about to type, it won't let you post it, I think.
It catches it quicker now.
Yeah. And so I can see that happening with text messages. That would be very frightening. Which that would be
That'll keep you up at night.
Yeah.
Well, since we just started talking about 230 again, I was pulling up another line from that same article from Human Events about the lawsuit, and it says, in his constitutional challenge, Jason Fick calls for 230 to be declared unconstitutional because it deprives American citizens through private commercial entities acting with federal government delegated authority of their liberties and property without due process and violation of the Fifth Amendment and free speech rights in violation of the First Amendment. Now, I mean, that seems simple enough, but obviously the collusion is so grand and complex that's going to take a while to untangle this. And, untangling this collusion, I imagine, is quite complex because we're dealing with complex systems. It's not just, black and white and just separating two entities just like that. So can you explain how your OFA proposal helps protect constitutional rights while also being beneficial for social media companies?
Yeah. So with Section 230, and of course it's been misinterpreted many times since then. But yeah, so Jason Fick, and you can go to socialmediafreedom.org if you want to learn more about our nonprofit, Jason's nonprofit. So basically, Jason, independently of the nonprofit, he rewrote Section 230. So he rewrote the law, and he's working with members of Congress to see if we can get it introduced. So the law that, as he wrote it, would replace Section 230. It would clarify the ambiguity of the text of the statute. And I'll share this screenshot here in a second, kind of this loop, irreconcilable loop. And it would prevent unlawful, arbitrary, and capricious censorship. It would promote uniform enforcement. So it's like, okay, you can't make a newsworthy exception to protect Don Lemon, and while at the same time you're like, going after right-wingers. It would provide obligations and procedural safeguards and respect the rights of all parties. So, so that's what the law that Jason wrote would do. Let me pull open that screenshot that would show kind of that irreconcilable loop. Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
So it's kind of a lot to digest. It just shows you how complex this law is. But these are actual quotes from the law itself. And so if we start at the top, okay, so let's stop at the very top left. So no provider shall be treated as the publisher of any content. So the thing that Jason found out is there's a difference between the publisher and a publisher. Because if I say the publisher, there's only one publisher, but if I say a publisher, then it can mean like multiple people. And let's just go through this a little bit and try to process a little bit. No provider shall be treated as a publisher. So the publisher is correct. And then we go to the right one. So misread. So they misinterpret it. No provider shall be treated as a publisher of any content provided entirely by another. And so because if you go to follow this to the right here, so the Ninth Circuit misinterpreted it, and it said 230 protects all publication decisions. So they can restrict materials and also promote things. And then 230C2 is redundant. So there's another part of the law, 230C2 that's redundant with 230C1. So those two things on the right there. So 230 protects all publication decisions per section 230C1, and it also protects any action voluntarily taken in good faith to restrict materials, 230C2. So there's two parts of the law that basically say the same thing. And then, so the fix is if we say 232C2 is not redundant, perhaps because they developed even in part third-party material. So even if Facebook developed in part any kind of material, the Ninth Circuit Court is saying, oh, that's okay because it applies to all publication decisions. But if they're doing that, then under the definition of, we're up here under 230F3, then they're an information content provider. So you can't be both. Like you're either like, it's kind of like that platform publisher debate. You can't be a publisher and a platform. You can't be both. And so if you're developing information, if you're like promoting content or censoring content, like, or in developing that, then that's a problem. And so the last part there is statutory conflict. And if this isn't making sense, that's fine. It's very confusing, but basically the last part, statutory conflict. So all publication decisions are development in part of third-party material. Therefore, any secondary publication decision is information content provision. So that's part of our legal argument. Let me find the more. Let me see if there's a more a little simpler diagram. Give me 1 second here.
One question I have is who decides what is good faith as part of 230C2? Any action voluntary taken in good faith to restrict materials? Well, that all depends on, that's subjective, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, good faith. I think there's a legal definition. So a lot of it is going through the what is good faith means based on precedent and the law. And so, yeah, I'd have to look up what that means, but yeah, good faith is a very key word that they use there, and then Good Samaritan is another one. And so that just gives you an idea. Like if you're confused right now, that gives you an idea why 133 pages are needed in this lawsuit, this challenge against the government to fix the law. And yeah, so the biggest legal doctrine is obviously the non-delegation. We talked about the EPA and how Congress had that authority. They delegated that, and really Congress should be the one making those decisions. Can you imagine like Congress having their own little like subcommittee that's deciding every little tweet or post on Facebook and whether it should be allowed or not? Like it's kind of a funny thought.
Yeah, right? I can only imagine. Yeah, let's bring this back to like everyday regular people and like what they can do and what their concerns might be. Like for anyone who's been banned from Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, what do you foresee as a path to getting their accounts restored, either in replacement scenario of OFA or 230 being declared unconstitutional? And how could any of these outcomes affect the social media landscape at large? Yeah,
so I mean, as users, like people, many thousands of people have been banned by social media. And it's funny because with Twitter being bought by Elon Musk, a lot of people are like, oh, Elon Musk, yay, he's going to protect our free speech. But I don't think we should believe in like one person or savior. Like we shouldn't have to rely on like a generous king who's going to save all of the peasants from tyranny. We really should fix the laws. So we're working on that. There's many lawsuits going on to protect our rights as users of the internet and online. So there's a lawsuit against Google that I was involved with earlier with Zach Voorhees. There's the Laura Loomer lawsuit, which I helped contribute to. But yeah, for the ordinary people, like what do I do? Like, okay, Ryan over here, like happened to work at Facebook and he's able to help with some things. But the everyday person, I think we can, choose. We can join other social media sites. We can support our politicians who actually have the backbone to try to change the laws in Congress. I'm not optimistic about that. But we can also choose like social media sites that are blockchain based, like Bastion. Bastyon. That are basically, use the power of blockchain to avoid censorship and avoid being taken down. We need to move away from Amazon. It's hard to do because they have, the Amazon servers and then the cloud. Everything's controlled by that. So if someone decides that you're a persona non grata, they can take you down. The banks can take you down, and we see that with guns now. With gun shops are being, blocked by their banks. So really, we need to reshape society, and we still have a lot of power as consumers to choose different products and different companies that support free speech. So that would be a good place to start. Just start locally, buy local, avoid the mega corporations like Walmart, Amazon, and go local as much as possible.
Yeah. And what is your advice to those of us still using Facebook, like me and probably like many listening? Like, do you think it's still safe to use? Can any individual take any little action to push back against the censoriousness on that platform?
Yeah, I mean, there are ways to, if you're still using Facebook, I mean, people are still going to use it. It's kind of hard to avoid, and especially if you're a business, if you're a small business, I mean, it's still a great place to find people, honestly, because people are still on there. So, definitely using. So let's say you open up your browser and definitely change your browser. So if you're using Edge or Chrome, change from that and use Brave or another browser that doesn't steal all of your data. So that just helps overall. And then, you change your search engine from Google to Swiss Cows. So even if you're on Facebook, and I think if you're on Facebook and you're using a VPN, it might maybe prevent how much tracking they can do. So I would definitely just encourage using a VPN, whether on your phone or on your PC. It's just good general practice and a good cybersecurity practice. So those are a few things we can do. And I wanted to highlight, because there was in your questions you sent to me, there was a really good phrase to use. Let me try to find it. I like the I'd like that phrase, censoriousness. Yeah, there's one phrase you mentioned in your questions to me that I really liked. You use the phrase true content freedom. So I like that, because true content freedom, that means like, yeah, I can share anything on social media as long as I'm not breaking the law. Like, and that's also the danger, I think, of these big companies with so many lobbyists in Congress. And it's what's happened in Europe. Like, I can't, like, we make it to the point where Congress may pass laws where sharing misinformation is against the law. And that's what's so scary, is where they get to the point where they say, where they basically criminalize free speech. And that's what's kind of frightening.
It is, yeah. And it makes me and many really wonder what their incentives are in Congress and whatever, whoever else is in the elites. What's the incentive to stifle free speech, do you think? Like, and even memes that are right-leaning or conservative or independent, just independent of the left.
Yeah, I mean, the incentive, I think it's a cultural incentive. So we see that these big companies, these big tech companies like Facebook and Silicon Valley, they are influenced by the culture. So their incentive, I guess, is to be on good terms with the cultural movements of the time. For example, I worked for Uber shortly in 2015 or 2016 as a contractor. I also drove for Uber at one point, but I worked in their corporate office in Phoenix, and I was a security contractor. I basically reviewed accounts. Like, if someone tried to steal your Uber account, or you were locked out of your account, I would resolve that. So I was on the computer, and they had when I was at Uber, just a short period of time, they had someone come in for this Uber Hue. It was like their group for diversity or whatever, right? And so they came in, and this lady literally talked about how they essentially blackmailed the CEO of Uber, Travis Kalanick, into donating money to like the Black Panthers. And they don't, yeah. So they got like a floor they got so much money from Uber. They built like an entire floor dedicated to Black Panthers at some building in Sacramento, California. And the way they described it was just like shocking, okay, yeah, you had so much pull and influence on these CEOs. So that's like, I can think that's the incentive. I don't know if it's blackmail or just them wanting to fall in, but if like 95% of the people are left leaning, then you're going to want to, you already have an incentive to like push certain things, or else you're going to get called out by Black Lives Matter as like a racist, you know? And so I don't know if it's that more of out of fear or just want to be in favor with the good group, the cool people. Yeah, so that's one answer, I guess, as far as incentives. But yeah, why would you want to censor free speech? I mean, and I was gonna, I told you I don't really know much about China and their relationship with Facebook, but we know that Zuckerberg does have a personal relationship with the president of China, and I mean they definitely know how to do censorship. So maybe there's some influence from there, from China, but it just comes down to control. I mean, it's a great tool. Facebook, if you're censoring people, it's a great tool for dictators. And if you're in South America and you have a lot of people on Facebook, I would definitely want to, if I was a dictator, I'd definitely want to hook up with Facebook and learn how to censor political dissidents.
Yeah, and you mentioned, well, you're mentioning of China, and you also mentioned Zach Voorhees.
Yeah.
That brings to mind some notes I had from private conversations with Zach. As viewers know, I did have Zach on my show, and we had a lengthy discussion about his whistleblowing of Google insider documents and so forth. But Zach Voorhees, the Google whistleblower who was on my show, and through Project Veritas, he tipped me off to so-called DEI initiatives that were implemented at Facebook and probably at Google. There was some collusion going on there too. According to the documents that Zach sent over, and I think these were the ones that you said were leaked anonymously to Project Veritas.
Mm-hmm.
According to these docs, more than 70% of Silicon Valley employees had H-1B visas in March 2020. And at that time, Facebook was prioritizing applicants from China and Korea in favor of American applicants, and instructed parts of their staff to not only inform other employees of their existence of the company's Diversity Initiative Board, DIB, on a need-to-know basis. So, this was not transparent. It was just, let them know that this Diversity Initiative Board exists only if they need to know. And not to inform employees of who is on the board at all. So to your knowledge, I know you don't know a lot, but as you hear this and as you reflect on these leaked documents, what else comes to mind about like possible collusion or an alliance between big tech and the CCP in China?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned like they use the H-1B visa programs, and we know that Silicon Valley, they hire a lot of people from India and overseas, and I think it's cheaper for them as a company. I mean, they already spend a lot of money as it is on engineers. Well, like the average engineer probably, they make at least 100,000, 150,000, so they can pay them much less. So it goes into that greater conversation about outsourcing, right? And the greatest place to outsource right now for products or factories is China, of course. But it just kind of goes to show like some of they don't want these things to be spoken publicly. So how transparent is Facebook really being with their relationships and who's influencing them? And I mean, as far as a censorship tool, like Facebook's amazing. Like, and going back to the origins of Facebook, is it being used by the CIA? I'm sure the spy agencies love Facebook. It's a great way to get data. But this could be a move toward a social credit system. I mean, if